Welcome to this first lecture of Introduction to Economics. We are going to take a look at the role and method of economics. So let's rapidly take a look at what we will be covering. We will first of all briefly introduce what economics is, then we will talk about economic theory, then we will look at one of the most important concepts in economics, scarcity, then we will move on to opportunity cost, and then we will start talking about marginal thinking. As an economist, it's very important to think at the margin. Then we will look at the importance of incentives, they do matter, and then specialization and trade. And finally, we are going to look at the first, second, and third economic questions every society faces and also every individual. So let's start immediately with the first one, a brief introduction. So what is economics? Why should you study economics? And what distinguishes the two main branches of economics, that is macroeconomics and microeconomics. So economics is simply the study of the allocation of our limited resources to satisfy our unlimited ones. What do we mean by all that blah blah blah? Here we are simply saying that economics takes time to study how society, individual, firms, how they go about allocating how they are going to use their limited resources. Now, resources are the things you need in order to produce goods and services. And for each and every one, it's limited in supply. However, the things we want are just unlimited. So because the things you want are unlimited, you need to make choices on how you are going to use your limited resources. For example, when you go to buy food or when you go to do your groceries, you may find that there are so many things you may want to buy, but you have a budget. You have to make a choice because your resources are limited, even though the things you want are simply unlimited. Now, what do we mean by resources? Resources are the inputs used to produce goods and services. So for you to produce goods and services, you need some inputs. Now we call these inputs resources, and as we are going to see, we have four main types of these inputs. So when we talk of goods and services, goods are generally tangible, you can touch them, but services are really not tangible, you cannot touch it. When you listen to a nice song, that's a service. You cannot touch that song. However, when you are eating when you are eating sushi, well, you can touch it. Now, for example, you have other resources like human effort and skill, land, machines, and factories. Now, let's just take a look at the economic problem. The economic problem, in other words, why we even have the field of economics, it is that scarcity forces us to choose. So because your resources are limited, you have to make a choice on how you will use them. For example, right now you are listening to this lecture. You could have been using this time doing something else, but you made the choice to listen to the lecture. So we have to choose. This leads us to give up other opportunities that we value. Maybe you could have been watching a movie, you value that, but you had to give that up to listen to this lecture. Now, why do we study economics? When you study economics, you develop a disciplined way of thinking at things, how to solve problems, and it just helps you better understand lots of economic and social issues like global warming, economics, education, health, and so on. Now, let's distinguish between the two main fields of economics. We have macroeconomics and microeconomics. Now, macroeconomics is looking at aggregates. For example, when you are looking at inflation, it's not just the cost of living of an individual going up, but you are looking at the cost of level at the level of a nation, at the level of a province or a whole city. So you put together, you are looking at the average increase of the cost of living put together. So that's the main idea behind macroeconomics. In other words, you are looking at the forest. Now, when you talk of a forest, you have lots of individual trees and trees of different species. However, that's not your interest. Your interest is to look at the forest as a whole. Now, microeconomics is looking at the individual trees. So you don't talk of unemployment, you don't talk of inflation. When you are talking of microeconomics, you look at individual units. You look at the household, you look at the firm, you look at the consumer. What motivates you when you make your choices? How do you choose to spend your resources? For example, how do you go about doing that? That's what microeconomics is all about. It looks at the trees in the forest. Now let's take a look at the second part of this lecture. What do we mean by economic theories? What are economic theories? What do we need? Why do we need to abstract? What is a hypothesis? And what is ceteris paribus? What is this assumption? Okay, let's move on. What are economic theories? Now, in economics, a theory is an established explanation that accounts for known facts or phenomenon. So you can observe something and it's generally accepted that that is how it works. However, what explains why that always happens? Let's take an example. If you increase the price of sushi, of a bowl of sushi or a plate of sushi, if you increase the price, and that is the only change that has taken place, you expect that sales will go down. Okay, if you increase it, let's say from $12 to maybe $20, you expect that sales will fall. Now, an economic theory comes to give a valid explanation why that happens. Not only it's going to tell you that will happen, but it will explain why that happens. So economic theories are statements or propositions about patterns of human behavior that are expected to take place under certain circumstances. Why is it important? It's simply important because it helps you make the right decisions. When you look at the changes going on, based on economic theories, you can anticipate what is coming and do yourself a favor by making the right decision. So they simply help us to sort out and understand the complexities of economic behavior in order to predict economic behavior. Now, why do we abstract? Abstraction is so important in economics. We use the example of a GPS. Now, a GPS is not the reality, but it's a representation of the reality, and it only showcases the most important concepts which are relevant for your decision making. When you are driving, you want to make the right decision. So the GPS highlights what is important for you to make the right decision when you are driving. That's the same thing with economic models. A model will only highlight what is necessary for you to make the right decision. That's why we abstract, because you cannot, it just doesn't make sense to use the real world. If you are driving, you want a GPS to guide you. You don't need to send your head through the window and start looking at the reality. You want to use a GPS. That's more practical. Now, what do we mean by a hypothesis? A hypothesis is just an educated guess about a research question. You see something going on and you say, okay, based on my understanding or what I've read, this is the reason why we are seeing. First of all, this is what will happen and this is why it's going to happen. And you can verify it. So a hypothesis is a testable proposition. In economics, it is a testable prediction about how people will behave or react to changes in economic circumstances. For example, if the price of iPads increased, we might hypothesize that fewer iPads will be sold. Now, this is just a hypothesis because it has not been proven. Now, you need to go out, increase the price of iPads, and observe what will happen to the amount of iPads sold. If you realize it's consistent, then it means your data now supports your hypothesis. So, empirical analysis is the examination of data to see whether the hypothesis fits well with the fact. And when that happens, it becomes accepted as economic theory. And ceteris paribus is simply a Latin word for holding everything constant. Now, if the price goes up and the income of people also goes up, then maybe it will not hold. But you want the price to go up and only the price to go up. That is why we say we need to hold all other variables constant for whatever we are saying to hold.